Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, November 20th. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. Don't have a beverage with me today. It's been a pretty busy morning. There's been a lot going on. We'll hop right in. Main topic of today, Commander Legends is here. Today's official release date for it. But one of the things that has become more apparent is that the release date it feels relatively meaningless to me. That's one of the things we'll talk about. We'll kind of hop right in. But today, the majority of the episode will largely be dedicated to how prices have trended and what we think we should buy. And we'll do kind of an analysis on some of the cards, some of the reprints, some of the newer additions to the set. So with that, let's hop right in. So I think we've talked about this several times. I've done a few past discussions on Commander Legends. It's come up a few times. We did previews. We looked at some preliminary pre-ordering. All that were things that we talked about. And today I think this will probably be kind of the last major follow-up for Commander Legends. Beyond this, after today, probably won't talk about too much more. Today is really the most interesting day because this is where the majority of the cards have hit the market. And it's become most available in the sense that the supply is probably not going to be any higher than it is going to be today. And demand also probably at its highest. It's very possible that demand may have passed its peak. I think the interest, the fact that people are getting product early, people, due to the nature of the pandemic, a lot of people are able to just go into their LGS and buy their product on pre-release weekend if they had ordered it in advance. I know some stores do allow that, especially with pre-release product. We've seen products slowly hit the market over the past few weeks, and over the past week rather, and that's really impacted the price of Commander Legends. So with that, I think one of the things that most people have probably noticed is that the price on Commander Legends cards, the new ones, have dropped pretty substantially across the board in the past week or so since they first started to hit the market. A lot of people did seem to want to get ahead of that and just sell their cards as quickly as possible. The major one, the marquee card for the set, Jewel Lotus, we've seen that card drop dramatically. It was pre-ordering at like $200 or something ridiculous, and then the price slowly trended downwards. I think the last time when I talked about Commander Legends, I want to say it was last week. At the time, Commander Legends had fallen to about $120. That was probably more in line with what we expected at the time, with relatively few sellers. But at the beginning of the week, over the weekend, once people were starting to open up their product and starting to get these, and people were wanting to turn around and sell it very quickly, we started to see the price go down to $100 to $90 to $80. And when I was writing this outline this morning and I was perusing through TCG Player, looking at these prices, you can actually buy Jewel Lotus for about $50 now. It's a 75% decrease over its initial pre-order price, which is mind-boggling to me. Obviously, the $200 price was far, far, far too high. I had expected it to probably settle in probably just under $100, $80, $90 or so. I think just kind of being the marquee card, probably the biggest card. It has the Lotus in its name. Lotus always has that sense of allure when it comes to creating Magic cards. And card that has Lotus, Mox, Time, something Ancestral, something Recall, something, all these buzzwords that have really resonated well with the Magic population over the years due to, of course, the reference to the original Power 9. All those cards in some way have felt like they've always maintained a price above what they normally should be, simply because those types of cards do carry that name that really sets them apart from the rest. Jewel Lotus, the fact that it dropped that quickly in this short of a time is a little worrisome to me. I think that it is very well possible that I'd overestimated how good this card would be and how valuable this card would be, but to see a pre-order card decrease that rapidly in value is a little bit alarming and a little bit worrisome for people who are looking to buy, especially thinking about trying to buy for their decks that they may not necessarily be building right away, but thinking about decks that they may want to build for the future and looking at Commander Legends and thinking, what card should I buy if I don't necessarily need them right away, but I do think I want to play these in decks at some point in the future. So Jewel Lotus dropped pretty substantially in prices, but even looking past that, even looking at some of the other cards, most cards have gone down a fairly reasonable amount across the board. Looking at kind of the big money cards in the set, if I just go to TCG Player, and I click on Commander Legends, I look at singles. Most of the cards that people had identified as the bigger kind of heavy hitters earlier on have gone down pretty substantially in value. Reprints alike. We'll talk about reprints a little bit later, so I don't really want to talk about Mana Drain, Scroll Rat, those cards. The new cards, Hull Breacher, the layable, the one that you flash in if they draw an extra card, it creates a treasure token for you. That has gone down pretty dramatically. From what I can see, let me see if I pull it up here. We're looking at $14 for this card. I think that's probably about 50% drop. I want to say this card was probably about $50 when it was first spoiled, basically prior to this week. Opposition Agent, the one that prevents you from searching, it allows you to take your opponent's search instead. We're down to $18 on this card. This is a pretty dramatic decrease from, I think it was about 35 or so. That's also kind of a similar 50% decrease that we saw. So really, I think the nature of how many people have access to this product and how many people are just opening it for singles and then just selling them is really, really, really high compared to what we usually see. And from what it looks like, it's possible that sealed product may be a little bit more constrained, but, excuse me, I should get a beverage. It seems like the people that did have access to sealed product and were able to open up a lot of it in mass, these singles, very, very, very available on the market. So I think if you are in the market to buy, we are probably looking at the best time to buy right now. It is possible that you could hold off and wait. We don't have another major set release for a bit of time. And the fact that the holiday season is right around the corner, people may be a little bit more constrained on money. Hard prices may not trend up as much. They may trend down as more does hit the market and as supply starts to really catch up with the demand. It is possible to wait. I think if you're looking to speculate, if you're looking to buy in quantity, this may be the time to do so this weekend as opposed to waiting. There are some sellers that have very, very, very deep stock on these. It's really indicative of them opening up collector booster boxes in very, very high volume. So I think we'll kind of go back and talk about this a little bit later in the episode, but I think there is definitely an opportunity for people to buy here. That being said, the new cards, the cards that are unique to Commander Legends, the fact that they have dropped very, very quickly in value is a little bit worrisome to me. I think that is a sign that the market is not necessarily stable, that a lot of sellers who are trying to turn over this product as quickly as possible, they very clearly don't want to be holding on to it. That does seem to indicate that they really want to be taking advantage of the hype as much as possible, and they will continue to sell their opened up booster boxes and collector boosters as quickly as they can to try and get as much value out of their boxes as they can before the prices really start to fall off a cliff. And that may happen relatively soon. It's really hard to say. The trajectory for sets have been a little bit different than this year than in the past years. I don't think we've seen kind of sets depreciate in value as quickly as they have, especially with these last two. If we think back to how Zendikar Rising was back in September, leading up to it, it looked great. Expeditions were always a winner. The set was new. The set was different. There were going to be a lot of things. The fall set is always usually a big deal. That's usually one of Wizards' best-selling sets in the year. Zendikar always has been very popular among the crowd. The first Zendikar was great. Battle for Zendikar, that was Introduction to Expeditions, did great. People were expecting the same, but it didn't really feel like it lived up to its hype. Once we kind of got past that initial rush and excitement for the set, it really felt pretty underwhelming. Part of that was how it kind of warped standard that immediately prompted some bannings. but a lot of the cards have really gone down pretty substantially in value, it feels like. And it feels that Zendikar Rising is going to be one of those sets that looked good on paper, looked good when it first came out, but in a few months when we look back on it, there's not really going to be a lot of excitement for a set. I don't really see cards that have a substantial amount of demand. Part of that may be the direction that Paper Magic hasn't really pushed a lot of the more competitive cards, some of the more powerful cards out into the spotlight. They're not quite as visible as Standard sets have been in past years, because Standard, with a lot of coverage, with a lot of Paper Magic, with a lot more people trying to play at their shop, and the metagame adjusting more quickly, these are all things that would help really propel the Standard sets forward. And it just feels like Zendikar Rising got stagnant very quick, and then it started to become underwhelming very quickly. I think Commander Legends, it is a slightly different product. It's not Standard. It doesn't really have that same constraint that Standard product has, that Zendikar Rising has. Commander Legends, appealing to Commander players, very different crowd of people. People will be buying and playing with Commander Legends in a very different way compared to how people would play with a Standard set like Zendikar Rising. So most of these cards, they will have longevity. A lot of these cards are very unique in design. We don't really have a card that can replace some of these cards due to their nature, due to their uniqueness, due to how they fit into Commander decks. So that is one advantage that Commander Legends has. And on a similar vein, collector boosters, I've definitely bashed on collector boosters before in the past. I think Commander Legends collector boosters are definitely a much better selling product to the crowd they are intended for. Zendikar Rising collector boosters are very underwhelming. I think that it's not really fundamentally any different than the past few sets. Core 2021, Ikoria, same idea. Collector boosters were one of those things that the novelty was there at the beginning, and I think that there's a place for them. Commander Legends is definitely the place for collector boosters. The nature of Commander draws a much different crowd. Collector, as suggested by name, is definitely something that is much more apparent inside EDH, inside the EDH community. People like to have the fancy cards for their deck, the bling, the extended art, foils, foil etch cards. All these things are things that are inherently much more interesting to your Commander community, as opposed to Zendikar Rising, where if you look at Omnath, for example, that's really the chase card for the set. That's the face of Zendikar Rising. There's not really that much of a price difference between the pack foil, the foil, and the extended art. Mainly because if people are playing Standard, not that you can play Omnath in your Standard deck, who really wants to go out and spend extra money to foil out their deck? Commander Legends does that well, because there's something for everyone. You're going to have the people that do want to foil out their deck. They want the premium art, they want the cooler art, they want the extended art. And those are all things that do well for the collector boosters. So looking at the singles themselves, we'll kind of shift away from sealed product a little bit here. Looking at singles themselves, I think some of the most interesting ones that we should look at are some of the reprints. The reprints are usually the ones that are most exciting. There's a lot of cards in Commander that are expensive because the demand in Commander has slowly driven up their value over time, but many of these haven't really seen a reprint because they haven't really been able to slot into a set, it feels like. Whereas Commander Legends, it feels like this was probably a prime time to really get these cards printed and back into market for people, especially for the people who've been just kind of waiting for these cards to become a little bit more accessible. So I think the big three that we can really talk about here: Vampiric Tutor, Mana Drain, Scroll Rack. These are mythics. These are cards that do see plenty of play in Commander and were kind of the talk of the set, as it were, because, as mentioned, these cards were pretty expensive prior to the reprint. Vampiric Tutor has gone very, very expensive in the past few months, especially since the beginning of the pandemic. Vampiric Tutor, really probably one of the most powerful black tutor cards you can play. Tutor cards, obviously very powerful in EDH due to the high variance of having a singleton card deck. There are a lot of communities I know that frown on tutors. They feel like tutors take away from the spirit of what Commander should be, in the sense that by playing tutors, you're basically doubling up or tripling up on some of your most powerful cards, especially the decks that really try to minimize the variance and that try to do relatively redundant things. It's always going to be tutor for this first key piece. This key piece is going to help fuel the next key piece, etc. And a lot of people do kind of frown on that style of gameplay because they feel that that's not really conducive to what a healthy Commander game should be. Without getting too much into philosophy regarding that, Vampiric Tutor was one of those cards very, very high in demand. We were looking at about $70 to $80, depending on which printing you want. Prior to the reprint, now Vampiric Tutor has gone down pretty substantially in value. I do want to talk about it a little bit later, so we won't talk about the price too substantially. Mandrain is another card that has done very well. It has gone pretty expensive. The last printing we saw for it was Iconic Masters, which is, I want to say, 3 years ago at this point. I think it was 2017 when Iconic Masters came out. That was a mythic. Same idea. It was relatively cheap. This Iconic Masters was the first accessible reprint for Mandrain. Prior to that, there was a reprint, but it was a Judge Foil. That Judge Foil was pretty expensive. And beyond that, we haven't really seen Mandrain be reprinted since its initial printing of Legends. So Iconic Masters, it has gone also pretty expensive as well. I want to say when Iconic Masters first came out, we were talking about $40, $50 for this card, and slowly crept up over time. I think it had probably peaked about a little bit over $100, like $20 or so, if I remember correctly, when I had last looked at one. The nature of Iconic Masters, being a master set, packs kind of expensive, not super available. So being a mythic from that set from 3 years ago, there's not really a lot of copies out there, especially if the people that are buying these are likely going to be people that are going to continue to hold them. So from a store perspective, trying to restock on this card, not super easy to do. So some of these things have really driven up the price of these reprints. The Mandrain is kind of a good example of that. Now Mandrain, you can buy it for $50. That was roughly about the same starting point the Iconic Masters reprint was when it first came out. So I think this is largely in line with that. Scroll Rack, kind of same idea. There are multiple printing for Scroll Rack. Scroll Rack was originally printed in Tempest. I'll say the first reprint was the Commander's Arsenal version. We've also seen it in a Masterpiece form in Kaladesh. There's also the gold border version. Gold border cards have started to become more popular as some of these older cards have become so expensive. Gaia's Cradle is really the most apparent one, where the gold border version is really as accessible as people can get. People have really started to warm up to the idea that gold border cards are a perfectly acceptable substitute for some of these more expensive cards. Scroll Rack, we're down to $20. Scroll Rack is one of those cards that I think is very, very powerful in EDH. It's a colorless artifact. It can really fit into any deck with some limitations, but most decks do play a lot of key pieces, shuffle effects, tutors, etc. that really make Scroll Rack powerful, that can really reset Scroll Rack. So I think it is a little bit better than some of these other cards. Mandrain, you are kind of restricted in the sense that you have to be playing blue. Granted, blue and green, most powerful and most popular colors in EDH, so that really should be a problem. Vampiric Tutor, black card, you have to be playing black. Most black decks do play Vampiric Tutor if they can. There again, some communities do frown on it, so that may be a tick against it, but Scroll Rack is the type of card where it's powerful, it helps you dig, especially in colors where you can't easily go through your deck, you can't churn through your deck and filter out cards you don't need. So Scroll Rack, definitely one of the more popular ones. Pretty easy to sell that card. My experience selling that card in the past has been, it's been relatively difficult to keep in stock, but the price was getting to a point where it wasn't really that accessible to a lot of people. So now that we're looking at a reprint and it going back to $20, this is probably something that a lot of people will be picking up on. It is a mythic still, so I think I'm gonna check. I want to make sure it's a mythic before I. But I know it's one of the reprints that they chose to do. in Commander Legends, and there is an extended art variant as well. It is a mythic, so I'm not crazy there. Um, this Scroll Rack is really the type of card I think that is at the right power level for EDH. It fits well into a mythic slot as a reprint. It's the type of card that has a lot of demand. It's not really controversial. No one ever complains, oh, you have Scroll Rack, this card is busted. It's one of those cards that does its function very well. It has a lot of demand, and the fact that there are multiple versions that people are able to buy now, and it's kept its original art, is this is probably going to be one of the easier cards to sell in the set. As we're speculating, I think this is the type of card that will go up in time, similar to how reprints generally go. Demand on this card, I think, far, far, far exceeds what the supply is, and this is the type of card, as it slowly gets attritioned over time, it wouldn't surprise me if we revisit this card in a year or so, and we're looking at a $30 price tag, and it'll slowly creep up over time back to where its original price was of $40-ish on this version. So just something to consider. If you are holding on to an older version, though, if you are holding on to a Tempest version or a Commander's Arsenal or a Masterpiece, that's when it gets a little bit dicey. I think the fact that there is the art, the exact same art in a modern card frame that appears in a non-foil form, does become a little bit problematic for people who have the Tempest version or who have the Commander's Arsenal version, just because people don't have you can get a non-foil version in a modern frame. And from my experience, when you have cards being reprinted, the modern frame is usually the one that sells the most quickly. We're at the point where there's more Magic cards, there's far more Magic cards that have the modern card frame, the modern card frame being post 2001 versus before. So people really like to go to, even the cards post 2015 when we have cards with a holographic stamp on. People, especially newer players, are getting to a point when they want uniformity in their deck. They want their decks to look the same. And it's really shifted away from what I felt when I was playing a few years back, at least 5 years ago at this point, that a lot of people like myself, I always prefer the original printing of the card. So if I were to play EDH, for example, my choice for Scroll Rack would be the Tempest version. That's original printing. If I wanted a full version, I would probably go for the Kaladesh Masterpiece. But nowadays, when we're thinking about how old Tempest was, a lot of these people who are playing Magic now, it's very possible they may not have even been alive when Tempest was printed. So now they start turning to the most recent printings of cards, and when I have big orders, I've always noticed that people who are placing big orders, very clearly orders for a new Commander deck, people are always choosing the most recent printing of the card. And part of that, I imagine, is to keep uniformity. People recognize the modern card frame. People like the modern card frame. It looks clean. It looks new. It looks modern, versus trying to go back and having mismatching cards from older sets, etc. Just something to keep in mind regarding Scroll Rack. Some other cards in the set, foil etch cards. These cards surprise me the most. If you look at them, if you look at the prices for them right now from TCG Player, when I wrote these, the only 3 cards that are actually of substantial value: Thrasios, Timna, and Sakashima. Those are about $20 in foil etched form. Kamal at $15, and basically everything else is less than $10 from what I could see. This is one that was particularly surprising to me. This is a little bit unfortunate, I think. I think that this is something that they may have dropped the ball a little bit on, in the sense of how accessible they are. They introduced foil etched as it felt like it should be a premium type rarity, something kind of mythic feeling, something that should be a little bit more unique. But with the fact that these are guaranteed to appear, it really has made the supply on them just completely out of control. A lot of these very, very, very cheap. And the fact that some of the lower end ones you can buy for $2, $3, $4, which is mind boggling to me, especially for something that isn't like a scroll rack. Scroll rack, it's very possible someone is going to go out and buy 2, 3, 4 scroll racks if they have multiple decks that can manage it. But a card like Thrasios, for example, that card really is a card where it needs to be your commander, or you're not really going to want it at all. It's not like someone else is going to go out and buy 2, 3, or 4 Thrasios. They're really going to go out and buy one, because one is realistically how many they need for their deck. If they have one, it doesn't really make sense to play as a card inside the 99 as opposed to being your commander. With that, the fact that these are guaranteed, they're much, much more common than most mythics inside a set, has really just completely crashed the value on them. And one of the things that is a bit of concern to me is if we look at some of the cheaper ones, Nagila is one of the etched reprints. That card hovering right about $12, $11 when I looked. There's a huge price disparity on that card between the foil etch version and some of the other versions that do exist out there. So this card was in Battle Bond. That was the first printing, the original printing for this card. And those are the only two printings. There's the Battle Bond, if you want a foil one, the foil Battle Bond, and now we have the foil etch version. The Battle Bond non-foil version itself is $10, $11. That's basically the exact same price as the full etch version. The full etch version right now I'm looking at, it's about $12.5. The foil version on Agila is still pretty expensive. It's $90. That is a bit of cause for concern for me, because I think the price disparity will cause a pretty big liquidity issue when it comes to trying to sell the foil version, because people are going to look at the two versions. If you want full Nagila for your commander deck, and you want to make one, for example, your choice is $90 on the full Battle Bond or $12.5 on the full etch version. That's a pretty large price disparity difference. Some of these are even more apparent if we look at Queen Marchesa. The foil is about $120. The full etch version is only like $10. I feel like you're going to have a really, really hard time trying to sell someone on your pack foil Queen Marchesa for $120 when there's a full etch version for $10. And I don't really see cause for some of these full etch versions to rise over time, because they naturally will sell so much slower than a card like Scroll Rack that really sees play more in one deck. Nagila really, really feels like a card that if it's not your commander, it doesn't really make sense inside your deck, because unless you're playing a 5-color deck, for example, you're just not going to get any value out of Nagila. Whereas Nagila, being your commander, you have access to all 5 colors, and that design really is something that is a reflection of how the deck building works. So full etch cards, don't really have a lot of faith in those. Those are something that I would generally stay away from. I think that the presence of them, the fact that they are there, is going to cause problems. I think, again, if you do own the pack full version of some of these more expensive ones, it's going to start causing you some issues. Even the most expensive one, Thrasios, $20. The foil version from the Commander Precon deck, it's still like $35, like $35. That one is a little bit closer. So I think that may be a real choice for people between, do they want the full etch one or the original one. So that one may be a little bit closer, but some of these where the price disparity is much larger, it's going to cause some real liquidity issues. So I would just generally stay away from these. I don't even really see an opportunity. Normally I'm the type of person that would look at the $2, $3, $4 and think, if I want to buy a bunch of these up, maybe stash them away, is there some potential for them? But as mentioned, I think the nature of them being legendary, them being you have to play them as your commander or not at all, is really going to hurt their liquidity down the line. So with that, what do we really want to buy? What do we really want to buy in this set? Are there any opportunities for us here to make money? And with that, I think that there are. I think some of the more interesting reprints are intriguing, but there may be cases against it. For example, if we look at some of the cheap reprints, these are usually the types of things I do want to target. Let's look at Staff of Domination. The prices for Staff of Domination are $4 for the Commander Legends version, which is absurdly cheap in my mind. It's $9 for the Extended Art Commander Legends non-foil, and $25 for the original printing from 5th Dawn. That's a pretty wide spread from $4 for the cheapest version you can get that's non-foil to $25 for original printing. That's a six times difference. That's a pretty big difference. If we look at the foils, we are at $7 for a pack foil from Commander Legends, $7. We are at $45 for the extended art foil from Commander Legends, so kind of a big jump there. We're looking at $70 for the original pack foil from 5th Dawn of the original printing. That spread, the spread of foil is a little bit bigger, but as mentioned before, when it comes to premium product, now we're going to start running into liquidity issues because we have $7 for the pack foil. That's really, really, really cheap in my mind, but they've really changed the dynamic of foils to be much, much more common than they were before. That's why we have a 10x spread between the cheapest foil you can buy, $7 in a pack of Commander Legends, and the original 5th Dawn foil, $70 at that point. Give or take, it's kind of hard to find a clean version. You may be a little bit pickier. If you're looking for like a near mint version, you're probably paying more than $70, give or take. And then the next step beyond that is the Kaladesh Masterpiece is $150. The spread here is pretty big that I think Staff of Domination is really going to be the type of card that will have some liquidity issues as well. It is an artifact, it does see play, but it's kind of a combo-oriented piece. It doesn't really go into every deck, despite being an artifact. That's when you're playing artifacts, you really want to look for those cards that every deck that can play it will play it. And Staff of Domination is really the type of card that it's powerful, but it really goes best in decks that produce a ton of mana. It's usually meant as a win condition for infinite mana combos, just because you can do so many things with it. Doesn't really just fit into kind of your deck that just wants to generate value and do good stuff type commander deck. Staff of Domination at $4, it does seem like a buy, but the part that worries me is that a lot of the price may be associated with price memory. People are going to think back to $35 Staff of Dominations, and people are going to think that $4 is cheap. Rightfully so. That card has been reprinted, and we've lost about like 80% of the value or so. That's pretty good. But the nature of it, it does seem like Staff of Domination is a type of card that the reprint is probably going to permanently kill the price. It's a rare. If we're looking at how many of these are out there, how many people have these for sale, especially some stores have very, very deep quantities on them. If you look on TCG Player, there's a store that does a lot of opening. Some of these rares, they have hundreds and hundreds of copies on. So that Staff Domination is kind of the type of card I would avoid. Rings of Brighthearth is another card that really falls in the same vein as Staff of Domination. If we look at the price breakdown for Rings of Brighthearth, it's actually surprisingly similar to that of Staff of Domination. We are looking at $6 for a pack of Commander Legends, just a standard pack. $9 for the extended art version from Commander Legends, and $22 or so, give or take, for the original printing from Lorwyn. When we look at the foils, we are looking at $7 for the pack foil from Commander Legends, $18 for the extended art foil. This one is much cheaper than the Staff of Domination version, which is kind of interesting. And $90 for the original printing from Lorwyn, and $110 for the Masterpiece version. Same idea, Rings of Brighthearth, not really a type of artifact that goes in every deck. It basically kind of follows the exact same trend as Staff of Domination. You really need a deck, especially if your deck is heavy on Planeswalkers, you're playing a Super Friends, a Traxa type deck. Those are decks where Rings of Brighthearth really shines. So you really need to build around your Rings of Brighthearth in order for you to get maximum value out of it. I think both these cards are generally indicative of cards that would really be completely crushed by the reprint. I don't really see these cards getting back up to their $20 value. It's possible that non-foil Staff of Dominations, non-foil Rings of Brighthearth from these sets could slowly creep up to the point of getting to $10, $15 sometime down the line, maybe in 1 or 2 years. But that's a long ways off. And with the amount of supply of Commander Legends, depending on whether or not we have more, depending on how much the print run for Commander Legends overall was constricted by the pandemic, we'll really have to see how these do. I am leaning towards the idea that these cards won't really recover in price. Rares are just far, far too common now compared to Mythics, compared to some of the more premium versions, full art, extended art, full art versions, etc. Same idea. Vampire Tutor is one that is a little bit more interesting. Vampire Tutor, it being a mythic, I think is a little bit more insulated from being crushed in price by the reprint. If we look at just Vampire Tutors, the 3 versions of Vampire Tutors right now, we have $40 for the standard pack version. We are looking at $50 for the extended art version, and $60 for the pack full version, and $200 for the extended art version. So I think this is a little bit more in line with how some of these more popular mythics will do. I think Vampire Tutor is one of those cards that is probably a little bit more outstanding than others. I think the $200 price of the foil extended art is a little bit too much, and I think the $60 pack foil price is a little bit too low, especially when you compare it to Eternal Masters, which the foil pack price of Eternal Masters is quite a bit higher than the non-foil version. Granted, slightly different animal distribution, slightly different, but I think the idea holds the same. I think some of the more interesting ones are how this has impacted the other printings of Vampire Tutor. So the original printing of Vampire Tutor from Visions and the 6th edition that uses the Visions art, they've gone down a little bit in price, but not so much. The Eternal Masters version has gone down a little bit, but it doesn't seem like it's going down that quickly. I think there may be some people that do prefer the Eternal Masters version for some reason versus Commander, so I haven't really seen it decrease that much. The one that was most noticeable, was most apparent, was actually the Judge version from 2018. That one took a big hit. Down, I think it was $120. Now we're looking at like less than $90 for that card. I think the fact that there are so many more premium versions is really going to affect it. But because the art is different, because the printing from Commander Legends is recycling the Eternal Masters art, those prices will probably stay in one area, and the original printings, Vampire Tutor 6th edition, and the original Judge printing, the original Judge foil Vampire Tutor, probably not going to be impacted that dramatically, because there will always be those group of people that do like the old art, that do like the old frame, do like the old foiling. So those should be relatively insulated. But as mentioned before, similar to a lot of these other ones, you may have liquidity issues. People are going to start thinking, well, if I want the cheapest full Vampire Tutor I can find right now, that's pretty easy. I'm just going to go for the pack foil from Commander Legends. But if I want to get something that's a little bit cooler, now we start having choices. Now we can look at the extended art version, we can look at the foil extended art version, we can look at the Judge promo from 2018, and the Judge promo from the original printing. I can't quite remember what year it was. So there's a lot of choices there. It does create some liquidity issues. Liquidity is something that I keep going back to, because at the end of the day, as a retail operation, as someone who wants to churn through cards, when cards become less liquid in an industry where a lot of things are already very illiquid, it becomes concerning. It becomes harder and harder to sell any individual item. And as a retailer, it becomes harder to stock any individual item, because now each individual item is hard to sell. Whereas if we go back before all this, selling Vampire Tutor was pretty easy, even up to a point when it had gone to $70, because there weren't a lot of choices. But now with so many choices, now we start having liquidity issues, because each individual version, there's more choices. Some people, if you aren't stocking the version that people want, you may just not get the sale. And that's a really, really tough thing for a lot of retailers right now, especially with how much retail is struggling. I know a lot of retailers have had very poor October, very poor November, and trying to catch back up especially when it comes to Black Friday, a lot of retailers are going to be doing the most they can to capture your money on Black Friday in their coming weeks to really make up for quarter four with how miserable it's been. So trajectory wise, looking at these three cards, as mentioned, I think that they do have some room to grow. The rares less so. It is possible that they have room to grow. I think that they will slowly go up over time as supply decreases. Vampiric Tutor, the Mythics, Mana Drain, etc., all those are going to do a little bit better because naturally supply will be more constricted, and they do have a little bit higher demand. So the cards that I think will do the best are cards that are Mythic, do see play. Granted, this is a huge subset of cards, I realize, but you want to look at Mythics. You want to look at things that are unique, things that could, if they have demand in the future, they would probably need another reprint at some point and really to keep their price down. So it's a little bit harder to evaluate, but I think if you're in the market for Commander, if you just want your Vampiric Tutor, I would probably buy sooner rather than later. I don't really see the price going much lower than where they're at now. Regarding box prices have remained relatively stable. They've gone down a little bit. I think we're about $130 for the booster box, and we're about down to $120 now that more are hitting the market. Collector boosters have gone down a little bit as well. I remember reading a Reddit thread, I think earlier, where you can get them on Amazon for like $210, which is mind-bogglingly cheap to me. That seems much, much cheaper compared to the $250, $260 that they were earlier this week. So if you're looking for a box, it's possible that the supply may be not as constrained as we had originally thought, as what we originally had seen kind of last week with really the lack of pre-orders, with the lack of sellers putting their stock up on TCG Player. So I think if you're looking for a sealed product, this is probably the time to buy. I don't really see it getting much cheaper than this. I think that there will be a fair amount of demand for sealed product as people are starting to get their hands on this product, and maybe even people are starting to think about stashing it away. These are all things to consider going forward. So sealed product is what it is. I do think that if it gets a little bit cheaper than this, it may be worth considering stashing away a decent amount of Commander Legends, because despite the trajectory of the prices and how far down they have gone, I think once we resume events, once it becomes feasible, once we kind of move past this pandemic and we have in-person events again, when we have at your game store, what have you, it's possible that people will want to go back and actually start drafting Commander Legends the way Commander Legends was meant to be played. It's meant to be a draftable set. Same with Jumpstart. This is one of the talks that we had touched on in the past. I think these are the types of boxes that if you hold on to them, there may be value in the future for these types of products once we kind of shift and move into having in-person drafts again and looking at that from what would be a normal life perspective. Just something to consider if you're looking to park your money in this set. I think those are the places I would look. So with that'll be a wrap on today's episode. That'll be a wrap on Commander Legends. It's possible we revisit again in the future. We'll see how some of these cards do and see if anything does change dramatically. But for now, that'll be a wrap on today's episode. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find the social media sites for Vermilion on the right. Thank you all for listening. Have a good weekend wherever in the world. Stay safe, and we'll be back next week with more. Thanks again.